In this lesson, we're going to talk about building up small groups in your church to create an infrastructure for discipleship, to create the conditions for a discipleship culture in your church. Now, in the first lesson, we talked about the fact that the family is sort of the basic group in the church, and we talked about the importance of parents. Well, in this lesson, we're going to talk about small groups. Here's the thing. Small groups are the organizational key for a healthy church. If you want to get your church to really begin to have the infrastructure of a discipleship culture, you need to go beyond just equipping parents at home. That's great. That's a great start, and never stop doing that. You always want to be equipping parents. Don't ever move past lesson 1. You always are going to be equipping parents. But if you want to really move on, the organizational key is to develop small groups in your church. Look at how this worked in Moses' time. It says this in Exodus 18:14. Moses' father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, and he asked, "What are you really accomplishing here? Why are you trying to do all of this alone while everyone stands around you from morning till evening?" See, there was a problem. Now, Moses wasn't trying to establish small groups in his church. He didn't have a church, and they didn't have anything called small groups, but it's the same principle. There was an organizational element that Moses was missing when it came to Israel and dealing with disputes. You can go back and read the rest of that chapter for yourself. It's a great read. But basically, Moses didn't think organizationally, and thank God, Jethro knew how to. And so Jethro came in and said, listen, if you try to mitigate every single dispute, if you try to be involved in every single thing, you're going to go crazy, they're going to go crazy, nobody's going to be happy. And so what Jethro proposed is organizing them. He proposed an infrastructure. He proposed an org chart. Go back and read it, but he basically says, here, you need to find faithful people that you trust, and you need to train them up, and you need to let them do the work. Don't you do all the work. You need to let them do the work. And it's the same organizational key for our churches with small groups. You need to raise up small group leaders so that you, pastors, don't have to do all of the shepherding work yourself, because you never would be able to. And so here's what that will create then. Small group leaders and co-leaders are like pastors of many churches. That's kind of a good way to think about it, and that's a good way to encourage them and boost them up and make sure they know how important they are to you. It's like you're the pastor of this church. If you're a pastor out there, you're the pastor of this church. You might have 100 people or 200 or 500 or 1,000 people. It doesn't really matter. But you're the pastor of this church at large. But your small group leaders, as you start to build your small groups leaders are like mini pastors. They're pastors of many churches. They might have a small group of 10 or 12 people, and they're in essence the pastor of those 10 or 12 people. Just like you are thinking and praying about the whole group and really trying to help the whole group pursue God, those guys, those men and women, the small group leaders and co-leaders, are thinking the same way about those that you've entrusted to them or that God has entrusted to them, the members of their small group. So they're like mini pastors in their small groups. Now, for this to work, pastors at church must be committed to marketing this idea. Now, we talked about this in the last lesson, but pastors, one of your jobs then, if you really want to create this infrastructure, if you want to build up small groups, it's going to take some time. This isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to take time for you to build up this concept, to build up the idea that people need a small group because it's like a mini church. If people want their needs met, they need a small group because that's the organizational key to having a discipleship culture. So people want to be cared for. People want to know that they have a pastor. This is why little churches are so popular, because so many people go to a little church because they're like, that pastor can help me, can really pastor me. Well, as your church grows, you can't lose that personal touch, but you will lose it unless you have small groups. So those small group leaders are an extension then of that heart that you have for people, and which is an extension of the heart that Jesus has for people. And that's exactly how God wants it to work. He wants us to equip and empower other people to do the work of the ministry. But here's the thing, once again, if you really market this truth, you're going to frustrate everyone if your group leaders aren't equipped. You can't just market something. Say, guys, join a small group, join a small group, join a small group. And then when they join a small group, when they finally go to someone's small group, the small group stinks. It's terrible. The small group leader's not equipped. He doesn't know what he's doing because you haven't equipped him. You haven't trained him up. So that small group experience is like a bad church experience. It's small groups in mini church. So, we probably have all heard about those churches that start up. They pop up, but they're not well organized. They're not well thought through. There might be a lot of zeal, a lot of great intentions, but no organization, no equipping, no training. That those pastors don't know what they're doing. The leadership team doesn't. And what happens is people go for a little while and then they stop going because it's not good. It's not helpful. It's not helping anyone. That's how a small group can be too. If all you do is market the small group and you don't spend any time equipping and training up your small group leaders to really be an extension of you, to be a pastor, to pastor that mini church, then it's all going to implode and your discipleship culture won't have any legs. You won't be able to really establish that infrastructure for your church to move forward with discipleship because your small group leaders don't know what they're doing. And so people show up and it's either a bad experience or it's an inconsistent experience. You never know what you're going to get. So it's really important that you don't just market small groups and small group leaders, but that you train them and equip them and make them good. And here's how you do that. You equip your leaders through a replicating small group ministry. Now, here's what we mean by that. You start with a handful of small group leaders. Maybe they're current small group leaders that just don't have any direction, or maybe they're just, if you don't have any small groups, they're just a handful of godly men and women that you trust, and you say, listen, I want to start with you. You train them up. You equip them. Use our small group training to do it. Keep it simple. You equip them with small group training. Walk them through the importance of small groups, how to run a small group, how to use the resources online to run their small group, all that stuff. You spend some time to pour into them, and then when they start their small group and you let their small groups just grow and you keep marketing their small groups and helping people get into their small groups because that's where people are going to be pastored, eventually what's going to happen if the small group is good, just like if a church is good, if a small group is good, it's going to grow. Healthy things grow. And so that small group's going to grow. And if you've taught your small group leaders how to replicate, in other words, how to raise up, and you do this in our small group training, how to use the same exact tool that you use to train them. Now your small group leaders can use that same exact tool to train their co-leaders because their group has gotten too big that they're going to branch out now and start another small group. That's what it means to have a replicating small group ministry. And it starts to take you a little bit more out of you don't have to have your hands in every single thing. You're still overseeing the structure, and that's exactly how God intended for it to be. Pastors, you're an overseer of your church. You're overseeing all these mini churches. You're making sure that they're equipped, that they're trained, and you're releasing them to do ministry. And that right there is the organizational key to your infrastructure of a discipleship culture in your church. Now go ahead and use that workbook and talk about this with your ministry team and with your pastor.